The knock came just after midnight, loud and deliberate. The kind of knock that does not belong to neighbors or delivery drivers. The kind that makes your chest tighten before your mind can catch up. I stood frozen in my own kitchen while the beam of a flashlight swept across, the living room floor catching on overturned pill bottles, scattered orange caps, and the small shape of my nephew crouched near the couch, crying so hard he could barely breathe. My sister stood a few feet away from him, pale and perfectly still, as if she had been drained of blood in an instant. That was the night the police showed up at my apartment. I remember thinking how quiet my body felt at that moment. Not calm exactly, but hollow, like something heavy had finally been lifted off me and dropped somewhere else. I could hear my own breathing slow and even, while everything around me felt unreal. This was my apartment. The child crying on my rug was my nephew, and the woman who could not bring herself to look at me was my own sister. I did not ask why the police were there. I did not rush forward. I did not try to explain anything away. I just stood there and watched as my ordinary living room, the place where I drank my coffee every morning and kicked off my shoes every night, stopped feeling safe forever. In that instant, I knew that whatever came next would change our family in ways none of us could undo. The strange thing is that I was not angry yet. I felt something colder than anger, something settled and final. Betrayal does that to you when it has been building quietly for a long time. You do not explode, you harden. Before I take you back to how all of this began, I want to ask you something, gently. What are you doing right now while you listen to this story? Are you sitting at your kitchen table folding laundry, driving home after a long day, or lying awake because sleep will not come? For me, when this all finally came to light, I was standing barefoot on my own kitchen floor, staring at the consequences of trusting family too easily. I am Megan Holloway. I am 34 years old and I work as a pediatric nurse practitioner. My job takes me all over the Midwest, filling in at hospitals that are short-staffed sometimes for a week, sometimes for nearly a month. I chose this life because it lets me help where I am needed most. And because after my divorce a few years ago, the quiet of living alone felt like a relief. My apartment in Columbus, Ohio, sits just a few blocks from the children's hospital where I pick up local shifts between travel assignments. It is small, clean, and very much mine. Family has always been complicated for me. I am the younger sister, the reliable one, the one who shows up on time and fixes problems without being asked. My sister Brenda is 7 years older than me. Growing up, she was always the dramatic one, the one who needed more attention, more understanding, more forgiveness. Mom worried about her constantly. Dad tried to keep the peace by staying quiet. I learned early that the easiest way to belong was to be useful and not make trouble. By the time Brenda divorced and became a single mom, that pattern was set in stone. Everyone rallied around her. Everyone excused her mistakes. And everyone assumed I would help because I always had before. The night the police came to my apartment did not start with shouting or slammed doors. It started weeks earlier, with something so small and ordinary that I did not notice it at the time. A set of keys, a moment of trust, a family dinner that felt just like all the others. When I think back on it now, that is what hurts the most. Not the sirens or the crying or the cold look in my sister's eyes. It is the memory of how normal everything seemed right before it all fell apart. I keep replaying the sound of that knock in my head, the way my nephew's sobs echoed off the walls, the way Brenda's shoulders sagged as if she had been waiting for this moment and hoping it would never come. I did not know it then, but that night was the end of one version of my life and the beginning of another. Everything started because my sister copied my apartment keys while I was away on a business trip. I did not find out right away. I did not catch her in the act. I trusted her the way you are taught to trust family, even when your instincts whisper that something is off. I had no idea that the quiet order of my life was already being rearranged, without my consent. Standing there in my kitchen, with strangers in uniform moving carefully through my space, I understood something with painful clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. This was the result of choices made behind my back, choices that used my kindness as cover. I wish I could say that I felt brave in that moment, or strong, or proud of myself for how things turned out. The truth is simpler and harder to admit. I felt tired. Tired of fixing problems I did not create. Tired of being the safe place where other people's messes landed. Tired of being expected to sacrifice quietly so that everyone else could stay comfortable. My nephew's crying cut through my thoughts, sharp and desperate. And it was then that the weight of what was happening finally settled in my chest. Whatever my sister had done, it had already hurt him. That was the line she should never have crossed. The police did not look at me with suspicion or blame. They looked at the scene in front of them and then at me, waiting. I did not offer explanations. I did not step in front of my sister. I let the truth exist in the room, heavy and unavoidable. Later people would ask me why I did not stop it sooner. Why didn't I ask more questions? Why do I let things go as they did? Questions are easy to ask when you are standing on the outside, looking back with all the information laid out neatly. Living inside it is different. Love clouds your vision. Habit dulls your instincts. And family teaches you to doubt your own discomfort. That night, as the reality of my sister's betrayal unfolded in my own home, I realized how dangerous that doubt can be. I am telling you this now because the story that led to that knock is not about one bad decision or one shocking moment. It is about the slow erosion of boundaries, about how easily trust can be exploited, and about what happens when the person everyone depends on finally stops, absorbing the damage. As I stood there, listening to the muffled sounds of the hallway outside my door and the uneven breathing of a child who should have been safe, I made a quiet promise to myself. Whatever came next, I would not lie to protect someone who had shown so little regard for anyone else. I would not soften the truth to make it easier to swallow, and I would not step back into the role that had cost me so much already. The night the police showed up at my apartment was not the moment I decided to fight back. It was the moment I realized that the fight had already begun, whether I wanted it or not. To understand how we got there, you have to go back with me. To a warm dining room filled with holiday lights, a familiar table crowded with family, and a small, almost invisible act of betrayal that set everything in motion. That is where this really started. Christmas dinner at Mom and Dad's house always looked warm from the outside. The same wreath on the front door, the same soft yellow lights in the windows, the same smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes that clung to your coat when you walked in. It was the kind of place neighbors slowed down to look at. The kind of home people assumed was filled with laughter and easy love. I used to believe that too. I arrived late that night, still wearing scrubs under my coat. My hair pulled back so tight my scalp ached. I had come straight from a shift at the hospital, the kind where you skip lunch and do not realize how tired you are until you stop moving. Mom waved me in from the kitchen, telling me not to worry about being late, but her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall anyway. Dad gave me a quick hug, solid and quiet the way he always did. Brenda was already there, sitting at the table with her son beside her, her hair perfectly curled, makeup flawless, like she had stepped out of a holiday catalog instead of a messy real life. "You look exhausted," she said, her voice soft and sympathetic. "You work too much." I smiled because that was easier than explaining. I had learned a long time ago that no one really wanted to hear about sick children and endless paperwork over mashed potatoes. I kissed my nephew on the head, dropped my coat over the back of a chair, and set my purse on the kitchen counter without a second thought. Dinner unfolded the way it always did. Mom hovered, refilling plates. No one asked to have refilled, fussing over Brenda's son, reminding him to say please and thank you, even though he already had. Dad carved the turkey, steady hands, quiet presence. Brenda talked about how hard the year had been since her divorce, how much she was juggling, how tired she felt all the time. Mom nodded along, clucking softly, telling her how strong she was, how proud she was of her for getting through everything. Every now and then, Mom's eyes would slide toward me. "Megan, you really should slow down a little," she said at one point. "All that traveling, all those long hours. Brenda needs help sometimes, and family should be there for each other." I swallowed a bite of food that suddenly felt dry. I was too tired to argue, too tired to point out that I helped all the time, just not loudly or dramatically. I nodded and let the comment pass the way I always did. Brenda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said she knew how hard I worked, that she admired me for it, that she worried I would burn myself out. Her concern felt genuine. I believed it was. I did not see the calculation behind her eyes, the way she watched me as much as she listened, At one point, Mom asked me to help her bring dessert out from the kitchen. I stood up, pushing my chair back, and left my purse where it was, right on the counter near the sink. I remember thinking how nice it felt to be in a familiar kitchen, to not have to think about anything except carrying plates and smiling politely. I did not notice Brenda follow me in. I did not notice her pause behind me while I rummaged through a cabinet for serving spoons. I did not notice the brief silence that settled over the room as she lifted my keys from my purse, angled her phone just right, and snapped a quick photo before setting them back exactly where they had been. She asked if I needed help carrying the pie, her tone light, almost cheerful. I told her I had it. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We sat back down at the table, the moment already gone, invisible to me. Dessert was sweet and heavy, conversation drifting to safer topics. Dad asked about my next assignment, and I told him I would be gone for a few weeks, helping out at a children's hospital out west that was short-staffed. He nodded, proud in his quiet way, telling me to be careful and call if I needed anything. Mom frowned, worrying about me being gone so long, but then smiled at Brenda, saying it was good that at least one of her daughters was settled close to home. I caught Brenda watching me, then her expression unreadable. She asked where my apartment was again, casually, as if she had forgotten. I told her a few blocks from the hospital, close enough to walk on nice days. She nodded, saying that sounded convenient, especially with my job. I did not think anything of it. After dinner, we exchanged gifts. Brenda gave me a scarf, soft and expensive, telling me I deserved to treat myself more. I hugged her, touched by the thought. Mom gave me a set of new kitchen towels. Dad slipped me a card with a handwritten note, telling me he was proud of the woman I had become. I tucked it into my purse, smiling. When it was time to leave, Brenda hugged me a little longer than usual. She told me to travel safely, to text when I landed to take care of myself. Her son waved from the couch, already half asleep. I waved back, my heart full in that quiet, complicated way family gatherings often leave you. I drove home feeling tired but content, thinking that maybe I had been wrong to keep my guard up so much. Maybe things were getting easier. Maybe we were finally finding a rhythm that worked. A few days later, an email popped up on my phone while I was packing a bag in my bedroom. Assignment confirmation. Pediatric emergency support. 18 days. I read through the details, the dates, the address of the hospital, the name of the coordinator. Everything was in order. I felt that familiar mix of purpose and relief. Being needed felt good. Being away from home felt manageable when it had an end date. The night before I left, I cleaned my apartment the way I always did before a trip. Fresh sheets on the bed, dishes washed and put away, trash taken out. I left a few groceries in the fridge, knowing I would not be back for a while. I charged my phone, set my alarm, and laid my keys on the counter while I checked my list one last time. In the morning, I locked the door behind me, tugging on it once to make sure it was secure. The hallway was quiet, the building still half asleep. I walked to my car with my bag over my shoulder, thinking about the long drive ahead, about the kids I would meet, about the routine I would fall into while I was gone. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel uneasy. I felt steady, safe, certain that my life, my space would be waiting for me exactly as I left it. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed with a message from Brenda telling me to have a good trip. I smiled and replied that I would, promising to send pictures of the snowy mountains she had always wanted to see. I had no idea that while I was driving out of town, the boundaries I thought were solid were already being tested. I had no idea that the sense of security I carried with me was built on something far more fragile than I realized. I left my apartment that morning believing that family meant safety, that trust was a given, that nothing truly bad could happen while I was away doing good work. That belief followed me all the way out of the state, and it would not shatter until I came home again. I pulled into the parking lot outside my apartment building late in the evening, the sky already dark, the air sharp with cold. The trip back from the assignment felt longer than the drive out, my body heavy with exhaustion, my mind drifting between relief and anticipation. I missed my bed. I missed my quiet. I missed the sense of control that came with being alone in my own space. As I climbed the stairs to my floor, my suitcase bumping softly against each step, I noticed something small and unsettling. Light spilled out from beneath my front door. For a second, I told myself I must have left a lamp on by accident. That happens when you rush. That happens when you are tired. I reached into my coat pocket for my keys anyway, my hand moving on instinct. Before I could unlock the door, I heard the sound of a television. Cartoons. Bright voices and exaggerated music too loud for the quiet hallway. My stomach tightened. I stood there for a moment, listening, my key suspended inches from the lock. I lived alone. I always had. I pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit me first. Microwave popcorn and something sugary like melted candy. Then the sight of my living room made my breath catch. The overhead light was on. The television glowed against the far wall. Toys were scattered across my rug. Small plastic pieces and stuffed animals where my coffee table usually sat. Clean and bare. Before I could process any of it, a small body came running toward me. My nephew wrapped his arms around my legs, calling my name, his voice high with excitement. I stood there stunned, my suitcase slipping from my hand and tipping over onto the floor. Behind him, Brenda appeared from the hallway, wearing one of my old sweatshirts. Her hair pulled back casually, like she had been living there for weeks. She smiled at me as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "You are back already," she said. "We were just watching a show." I looked past her, taking in the rest of my apartment. Shoes by the door that were not mine. A duffel bag leaning against the wall. My throw blanket folded differently than I left it. Every detail felt wrong, like a picture hung slightly crooked that you cannot stop staring at. I asked her how she got in. The words came out steady, but my heart was pounding. She shrugged, the movement almost careless. She told me she had made a copy of my keys. She said it like she was admitting she borrowed a sweater without asking. She reminded me of Christmas dinner, of how she had my keys for just a second. She said she did not think I would mind. I told her I did mind. I told her this was my home. She waved a hand dismissively and said she knew, but she did not have any other choice. She said her son had been sick. She said it quietly, with just enough strain in her voice to sound convincing. She said doctors were worried. She said he needed to be close to a hospital, close to specialists. And my apartment was perfect because it was near the children's hospital where I worked, as if proximity were a favor she was doing me. She motioned toward the kitchen counter, where a large tote bag sat open. Inside were prescription bottles, inhalers, blister packs, syringes, all jumbled together. The sight of it made my chest tighten. I stepped closer without thinking, my professional instincts kicking in before my personal ones could catch up. She started listing conditions, words tumbling out of her mouth in a rush. Asthma, immune issues, allergic reactions. She said the doctors were still figuring things out. She said it had been terrifying. She said she did not want to bother anyone, but she had to do what was best for her child. My nephew climbed onto the couch and grabbed the remote, completely at ease. He did not look sick. He did not look fragile. He laughed at the screen, swinging his legs back and forth. I asked her which doctors were treating him. She named one casually, somewhere across town. She said appointments were constant. She said managing everything alone had been overwhelming. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and her expression softened. "I thought you would understand," she said. "You are good with this stuff. You know hospitals." I just needed somewhere to land for a little while. For a moment I could not speak. The room felt too small, the air thick. Part of me wanted to grab her bag, march it back out the door, and tell her to leave immediately. Another part of me was frozen, caught between shock and a lifetime of conditioning that told me to be reasonable, to be kind, to help. I told her she could not just move into my apartment without asking. I told her that copying my keys crossed a line. She sighed, rolling her eyes slightly, and said she did not think I would react like this. She reminded me that we were family. She reminded me that her son needed stability. I looked at him again. He smiled at me, completely unaware of the tension hanging in the room. My anger wavered, slipping into something closer to fear. If what she was saying was true, if he really was sick, then throwing them out felt cruel. If it was not true, then something else was very wrong. I told her I needed time to think. I told her this was not okay, but I was too tired to deal with it that night. She nodded, relief washing over her face so quickly it almost startled me. She said thank you. She said she knew she could count on me. She went back to the kitchen, humming softly as she started rummaging through my cabinets, as if she belonged there. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, staring at my neatly made bed, the only part of my apartment that still felt untouched. That night I lay awake, listening to unfamiliar sounds. The murmur of the television through the wall, The creak of the bathroom door opening and closing. My nephew coughs once lightly before settling back into sleep. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself I would sort it out in the morning. In the days that followed, Brenda acted like a guest who had overstayed without ever asking permission. She rearranged my pantry. She used my coffee without replacing it. She talked on the phone late at night, her voice low, stepping out onto the balcony when she thought I was asleep. Every time I tried to bring up boundaries, she deflected. She reminded me of how sick her son was. She thanked me for being understanding. She told me how lucky she was to have a sister like me. I watched closely the nurse in me, unable to turn off. I watched my nephew run up and down the hallway, his cheeks flushed with energy. I watched him eat full meals without complaint. I watched as days passed without the regular medications she claimed he needed. Something did not add up, but I could not yet put my finger on it. One evening I stood in my kitchen holding one of the prescription bottles, reading the label over and over. The name was correct. The dosage was high. The instructions were strict. I set it back down carefully, my hands trembling. I did not confront her. Not yet. I told myself I needed more information. I told myself I would figure out a way to fix this without blowing everything up. I told myself that families work things out quietly behind closed doors. But deep down, a different thought had begun to take root, cold and persistent. I was no longer sure what kind of situation I had allowed into my home. I only knew that it was bigger than a favor, bigger than a misunderstanding, and that whatever came next would require more from me than I was prepared to give. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I understood one thing with unsettling clarity. I had not just come home to a messy apartment. I had come home to a problem that would not solve itself. I had a sinking feeling that I was standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than I could see, and that feeling did not fade with sleep. When morning came, it settled deeper into my bones, like something waiting to be acknowledged. I woke to the same bright cartoon voices echoing down the hallway, sounds that should have belonged to a weekend visit, not to my daily life. For a moment, I simply lay still, staring upward, tracing the shadows on the ceiling as if they might tell me what to do. But nothing was answered. Nothing changed. I got up slowly, pulled on scrubs, and moved around my room with the kind of care people use when they do not want to be heard. I listened to the rhythm of the living room. My nephew laughed at something on the television. Brenda talked softly, the kind of talk meant to sound harmless. Her voice dipped low, then rose again, then fell into a hush. I still could not make out the words, but the tone bothered me. It had bothered me from the first night, though I could not explain how. When I stepped out of my room, she turned around fast. "Morning," she said, as if she had been expecting me at that exact moment. "In the morning," I murmured back. I poured myself coffee, the bitter smell grounding me. My nephew ran across the room to show me a toy car completely full of energy, as steady and bright as any healthy 7-year-old. He did not cough. He did not wheeze. His cheeks were flushed with play, not illness. I knelt beside him for a second, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. He looked perfect. Too perfect for what Brenda claimed. On the drive to the hospital, I found myself rehearsing questions I never asked. The doctor said he had asthma so severe he needed emergency access. What immune disorder required constant monitoring. Why Brenda had never mentioned any of this before. Why had she never called me during my assignment if things were so alarming? I had no answers, only an uneasiness that twisted inside me. All through my shift, that uneasiness followed me. I checked charts twice. I measured dosages even when I knew I had it right. I caught myself staring at a wall while a coworker asked me a question. My mind drifting back to my living room, my kitchen counter, the tote bag filled with prescriptions. I reminded myself that confusion does not equal certainty. But confusion plus evidence begins to form a different shape. When I got home that evening, the apartment felt even smaller than before. Brenda was on her phone again, sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her like she had been there for hours. My nephew ran toward me again, bubbling with excitement. He wrapped his arms around me, and I held him a moment longer than usual, studying him with my medical eyes. His breathing was perfect. His voice was clear. His body is strong. Nothing about him matched the long list of conditions Brenda described. She hung up quickly when she noticed me. "You are home earlier than yesterday." I nodded. She tilted her head and asked if everything at work was all right. I said yes, and walked into the kitchen pretending I needed water. She followed me, leaning against the counter like she wanted to talk. She said the hardest part of being a mother to a sick child was how unpredictable things were. She said she could barely sleep from worrying. She said the last few months had been a blur of appointments and medications, and fear. She said it all with a voice designed to tug at soft places. She reminded me again how grateful she was that she could stay here a while. A while. The phrase echoed in my mind long after I returned to my room. That night she cooked dinner, humming lightly as if everything were under control. She wiped the counter with my kitchen towel. She rearranged my spices. She tucked my nephew in on my couch with a blanket that smelled vaguely like the detergent from her old house. She moved through the space as if she had rearranged not only objects as boundaries. By the third day, the unease had grown sharp around the edges, cutting into my patience and shaking something inside me awake. That afternoon, I finished earlier than expected. I forgot to send Brenda a message about my schedule. When I opened the door, the apartment was strangely quiet. The television was off, the lights dim. For the first time since returning home, the stillness made me hopeful. Maybe she had taken him out for fresh air. Maybe they were at a real appointment. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Then I heard her voice. She was in the bathroom hallway. The door was open 3 inches. Her voice, usually smooth and controlled, was tight. Urgent. I stopped halfway between my bedroom and the entryway, holding still. Breath shallow. I have 3 bottles left. Her tone was sharp enough to slice the air. 2 more are gone already. I told you I needed cash today. Not later. Today. My pulse jumped. I instinctively reached for my purse as if it held an explanation, but my hand froze halfway. I heard a silence on the other end of her call. Then her voice grew even steadier, like someone trying to control a situation slipping through their fingers. No. Listen to me. I am not getting more until you pay. You hear me? I already risked enough. Risked. That word struck me harder than the rest. My shoes suddenly felt too small. My breath felt too loud. I stepped backward, pretending to be adjusting my hair when she ended the call and came down the hallway. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Then she forced a smile. You startled me. I did not expect you for at least another hour. Shift changed, I said evenly. Finished sooner. She nodded and tucked her phone into her pocket quickly. The gesture too practiced. My nephew came out from the bedroom, then still full of life. He lifted his arms for me to pick him up, and I did. His heartbeat was strong against my shoulder. His breathing is easy. His skin is warm, not feverish. I lowered him back to the floor slowly, studying him without letting myself look too long. Later that evening, while Brenda took a shower, I went to the kitchen counter. The tote bag was still there. I hesitated only a second before opening it again. This time the neatness was gone. Everything inside looked rummaged through. The prescriptions that were full 2 days earlier were now glaringly empty. I picked them up, one, then the other, completely empty. My nephew had not taken anything. He had not needed anything. The medications were gone, but the child they were supposedly for had shown no side effects, no reactions, nothing. I lifted the bottles to the light, turning them slowly, reading the labels again and again until the words blurred and sharpened with each pass. That was not a misunderstanding. That was not poor communication. That was not stress or worry or the messiness of a difficult time. That was missing medication. Missing medication with high street value. Missing medication with dosing instructions much too strong for a healthy boy. Missing medication in the possession of a woman who had just argued about cash. And bottles over the phone. I placed the bottles back exactly where they had been. I made sure the bag looked untouched. My hands shook as I arranged everything. I closed the tote gently and walked to my bedroom, leaning against the door once it shut behind me. For several minutes, maybe longer, I did not move. I just listened to the muffled sounds of the shower. The running water lulled the apartment into a false calm, but inside my chest nothing was calm. The pieces were finally snapping together in ways I wished they would not. Something was wrong. Something bigger than inconvenience or boundary issues or temporary housing. Something dangerous. I sat down on the edge of my bed, steadying my breath. Images flowed through my mind. My nephew laughed. My nephew is running. My nephew is healthy. Then the medicines. The empty bottles. The call about cash. The lies wrapped in soft excuses. The way Brenda had looked at me, confident that I would not question her. confident that I would support her without hesitation, confident that I would be blind. I had been blind, but I was not anymore. When she emerged from the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, she asked if I wanted tea. Her voice was so casual, so light that it took me a second to answer. I said no. She went about her routine as if she had nothing on her conscience, as if everything was perfectly normal. She did not notice I was watching her. She did not realize I no longer saw her actions as careless but calculated. She did not understand that something had shifted irreversibly in me. The rest of the night passed quietly. Too quietly. I heard her typing on her phone in short bursts. I watched her delete her screen every time I approached. Around 10, she checked on her son, kissed his forehead, and whispered something I could not hear. Then she glanced toward my room, unaware that I was still awake, listening. I lay there long after she turned in, staring into the dark. The pieces formed a shape too sharp to ignore, a truth that was no longer speculation but evidence. My nephew was not sick. The medications were being used for something else. And Brenda had moved into my apartment not because she was desperate, but because she needed space, privacy, and distance from eyes that knew how to see. The danger I had sensed was real now. It was here in my home, breathing the same air. I understood then that I was not simply living with a messy situation or a difficult sibling. I was living inside the center of something deeply wrong, and the line I had tiptoed around was no longer in the distance. My next step would be to cross it. I did not know yet where that path would lead, but I knew the moment I discovered those empty bottles, my role in this story had changed, and whatever came next, I would not be pretending anymore. The next morning I woke with a clarity that felt cold and unwelcome. I moved through my routine carefully, listening to the familiar sounds outside my bedroom door. My nephew chattered over breakfast. Brenda spoke to him in a tone so perfectly warm that anyone else would have believed her. I carried my coffee to the small kitchen table and watched them, examining every detail with fresh eyes. He looked fine. Better than fine. Bright, bubbly, energetic. He had slept through the night without a single cough, and as he swung his feet under the table, he showed no hint of fatigue. Brenda slid a plate in front of him, touching his hair gently. She caught me watching and offered a soft smile. It was practiced polite and suspiciously smooth. "We should probably take him in this week," she said. "The doctor wants an update." "Which doctor?" I asked. I kept my voice steady. She blinked, startled by the directness, then said the same name she had mentioned before. Dr. Morrison, at West Valley Pediatrics. I had lived in this city for over a decade. I knew the major pediatricians. I knew who specialized in respiratory issues. I knew who accepted which insurances. I had never heard of this doctor, but that did not mean he did not exist. Not yet. "Do you want me to take him?" I asked. "I can help. If he is really sick, he needs consistency. I can talk to them, go through the notes. Whatever is needed." Her shoulders stiffened. "No, it is fine. I will handle it. You have work." "I do," I said, "but I also have medical training. I know what questions to ask. It would help me understand what he needs at home." She hesitated. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Not fear exactly, not guilt, something closer to calculation. She shook her head. I said, "I will take him." The tone was final, but I had already made up my mind. I waited until after lunch, when she gathered her purse and said she needed to run errands, and then I made my move. "Let me take him today," I said. "You have been doing everything. Give yourself a break. I am off for a few hours before my next shift." Her reaction was almost comical. She clutched her purse strap with both hands, blinking too fast. "Today?" "No, I cannot because they do not have availability until next week." That did not match anything she had said before. The inconsistency was glaring, and her voice wavered enough that my decision solidified. I reached for my jacket. "Then let me do a quick check at my hospital. Just a basic evaluation. It will not hurt." She froze. Her eyes darted toward her son, who was zipping a small hoodie, excited by the idea of going somewhere. "No, Rachel, I appreciate your concern, but we do not need another evaluation. We just need to follow what his doctor already advised. West Valley Pediatrics has his whole history." "Then you have the number," I said. "Give it to me. I can call for records so that anything we do is consistent." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked down, fiddling with her purse zipper. "I do not have it saved," she said lightly. I always call from my laptop. I will send it later. She would not. I knew she would not. My nephew tugged my sleeve. Can we go somewhere, Auntie Rachel? He sounded so hopeful it hurt. I knelt down. How about we go see my friend first, I said. She is a doctor, too. She is very nice. He nodded enthusiastically. Before Brenda could object again, I lifted him gently, grabbed my keys from the hook, and said we would be right back. Brenda followed us into the hallway, her face pale. Her voice strained as she tried to sound casual. I really do not think this is necessary, she said. I paused and met her eyes. Your son deserves clarity. So do I. I closed the door before she could respond. In the car, my nephew hummed along with the radio. He talked about a drawing he made that morning. He asked if we could get ice cream later. He did not mention doctors. He did not complain about chest tightness. He did not rub his nose or throat. He did not yawn excessively. He did not show even one symptom of respiratory or immune complications. We pulled into the parking lot at my hospital, and he bounced in his seat. He liked visiting. I had brought him here before for quick tours, birthday cupcakes, holiday toy drives. This place was familiar to him. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. Nurses greeted me with the same warm smiles they always did. I explained briefly that my nephew needed a quick check, that something did not feel right. They trusted me enough not to question her. Lisa Chen, whom I had worked with for years, stepped into the small exam room. She greeted my nephew warmly, letting him choose a sticker before she even touched her stethoscope. She examined him with care, listening to his lungs, checking his throat, measuring his vitals. She kept glancing at me with quiet confusion. Finally, she lowered her stethoscope. Rachel, she said gently, he is perfectly healthy. I exhaled slowly, even though I already knew. No signs of respiratory issues, she said. No abnormal sounds. No inflammation. No signs of allergies today. His vitals are excellent. His oxygen saturation is perfect. My nephew swung his legs happily on the edge of the table. So he is okay, he asked. He is very okay, she said, smiling at him. I thanked her quietly and walked him back to the car, my steps heavier than before. When we returned to the apartment, Brenda was waiting just inside the doorway, pacing. The moment she saw us, her relief was visible, but it morphed quickly into irritation. Where were you? She demanded. I looked at her calmly. I got him checked. For my peace of mind. And for him. Her face stiffened. You should have told me. You should have asked. You cannot just take him without permission. You take him everywhere without telling me, I said. Softly. She bristled. That is different. How, I asked. You live in my home. You use my space. You claim he is sick. I wanted clarity. She crossed her arms tightly. And what did they say? They said he is healthy. She laughed, but it was a brittle sound. Then their equipment is faulty. Or their doctor is inexperienced. His real doctor knows his condition. Then give me the number, I said. I want to speak to him myself. She turned away. Her jaw tightened. She muttered that she would send it later. But she never did. That night after she went to bed, I sat on the couch with my laptop. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My nephew breathed quietly from his makeshift bed on the couch. I opened my browser and typed in West Valley Pediatrics. The clinic existed. It had a website with staff photos and a long list of physicians. I went through each name one by one. No Dr. Morrison. I typed the names separately. Nothing. No records. No publications. No listings. No licenses. Not in the state's medical board database. Not in neighboring states. Not anywhere. My heart began to beat slower, heavier, like it did the night I found the empty bottles. I sat back and closed my eyes. If the doctor did not exist, then the prescriptions did not come from him. If the prescriptions were not legitimate, then someone else wrote them. Someone who should not be writing them. Someone who was taking advantage of a child's records. Someone who knew how to exploit the gaps in the system. Slowly, reluctantly, I whispered the thought forming in my mind. She might be making her child sick on paper. And for the first time since this began, I felt genuine fear. I sat in the dark of my bedroom long after that realization settled in my chest, my mind circling the same thought again and again. She might be making her child sick on paper. Those words felt unnatural coming from me. I had spent my entire adult life helping sick children breathe easier, sleep better, and grow stronger. The idea that someone in my own family might be fabricating illness for reasons I could not yet name left a cold stillness deep inside me. It was as if I had stepped into someone else's life entirely, a place where nothing made sense and everything was blurred by shadows. I knew I could not rely on guesses. I needed facts. I needed something solid I could look at without wondering if I was imagining it. So I turned on my bedside lamp, the soft yellow glow spreading across the blankets, and reached for the tote bag I had brought into my room earlier. I emptied everything onto my bed. The bottles rattled against each other. The papers slid lightly across the comforter. I arranged each item in rows like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. The first thing I did was pick up the nearest prescription bottle. I turned it slowly in my hand, reading the label with deliberate attention. It listed a pediatric dosage of prednisolone. The doctor's name printed below the dosage instructions was one I did not recognize. I read the pharmacy name. It was from a suburb nearly an hour away. I checked the refill date. It was recent. Too recent. I set that bottle aside and picked up another. Albuterol this time. A different doctor's name. A different pharmacy. Then another bottle. And another. Every time I read the labels, my stomach pulled tighter. I found one bottle with a name I did recognize. Not from my city, but from the hospital in Nevada, where I had just completed my assignment. Dr. Raymond Cole, a pediatrician who had been in several of my overnight consultations. He was competent, kind, and conservative with prescriptions. He would never write medication without a clear reason. My pulse fluttered. This was a lead I could not ignore, so I reached for my phone. Even though it was close to midnight, I called a colleague in Nevada who owed me a favor after I covered 2 of her emergency shifts. She answered, sounding tired, but when she heard the urgency in my voice, she became alert. "I need you to look up a patient for me," I said. "The name is Jacob Slater. Date of birth, March 15th, 2017. Check if Dr. Cole wrote any active prescriptions for him." She hesitated. "You sure it is okay for me to look that up?" "I know the policies," I said quietly, but I would not ask if it was not important. "Please." Something in my voice convinced her. I could hear her typing. The clicking of her keyboard stretched into long seconds. Then she spoke again, slower this time. "That child has an unusual history. Dr. Cole saw him once for a mild cold, nothing serious. But there are multiple prescriptions attributed to him afterward. Mostly call-in refills. It does not look right." I closed my eyes as the weight of that settled in. "Thank you," I whispered. "Do not mention this to anyone yet. Please." She agreed. We hung up, and I was alone again with the bottles spread out before me and the sinking realization that my sister was not just bending the truth. She was manipulating medical professionals across multiple cities, and she was using her own child's records to do it. I turned back to the bed. Something in me hardened, something steady and focused. I picked up each bottle again. I wrote down every name, every pharmacy address, every date. I made notes about the quantities and which ones were empty too quickly. The pattern was becoming clear. The doctors listed were spread across the state. Several clinics were in completely different cities. One label had spelling inconsistencies. Another had mismatched formatting that any trained eye could recognize as suspicious. This was not accidental. This was organized. I needed more than labels to prove it, though. I needed something stronger, something undeniable. I stood and walked quietly to my living room. In the small drawer beneath my old DVD player, I found a tiny camera I had bought last year after a series of car break-ins in our complex. I never used it. It was still in its box, still untouched, still waiting. I stared at it for a few seconds. It felt strange to use something like this against my family. But whatever warmth or loyalty had kept me silent up to this point had been broken by those labels and by the image of my nephew sleeping peacefully while a system of fraud was built around his name. I charged the camera, watching the tiny red light blink steadily. Then I set it behind a row of books on the living room shelf. From that spot, it had a clear view of the couch, the kitchen counter, and the main doorway. If my suspicions were correct, then everything she wanted hidden would pass through that space. I went to bed uneasy. Sleep came in short waves, broken by flashes of memory. Brenda told me not to worry. Brenda insisted he had a severe asthma condition. Brenda cried to Mom about how overwhelmed she felt. Brenda smiled as she unpacked those medications. The next day I left for work as if nothing was wrong. She asked again what time I would be home. I said I was not sure. She tried to hide her tension, but I noticed the way her hand gripped her coffee mug, the way her jaw tightened when she turned away. She did not want unpredictability. She wanted control. She wanted time unchecked. At the hospital, I kept my focus as best I could. Children came in with fevers and sore throats. Parents asked the usual anxious questions. I kept my voice steady. My hands are steady, but my mind kept drifting to that small hidden camera in my living room. When I came home at 5, the apartment was empty. The silence pressed against me. I walked around slowly. There were small signs they had been there earlier. A cereal bowl in the sink, a towel drying by the heater, but everything else felt carefully placed. Too carefully. I waited until they returned. Brenda carried grocery bags and talked about the sunny weather. She described ducks they fed in the park. She handed Jacob a small pack of markers as a reward for good behavior. The normalcy felt almost theatrical. I found myself smiling and nodding, even though something inside me recoiled from her every word. That night I excused myself early. I waited until the apartment settled. When their room fell silent, I returned to the shelf, retrieved the camera, and carried it into my room with a slow, steady breath. I plugged it into my laptop. The footage began around 9:30. Brenda moved around the living room, her movements brisk and fidgety. She cleaned surfaces that were already clean. She rearranged items on the coffee table. Then she pulled the tote bag onto her lap, opened it, and began sorting through bottles. She checked labels. She counted pills. She wrote something in a small notebook. She kept glancing toward the door with an anxious rhythm. Then the knock came. I felt my breath catch. She stood quickly smoothing her hair before answering. She opened the door partway, speaking quietly with someone standing just out of frame. She held out a small plastic bag containing 2 prescription bottles. The figure outside reached in and handed her an envelope. Cash. They spoke for a few more seconds, but the audio was too muffled to hear clearly. Then the person walked away. Brenda closed the door and leaned against it for a moment like she needed to catch her breath. Then she opened the envelope and counted the money with quick, practiced movements. I felt a coldness travel through me. The footage continued. After counting, she tucked the envelope into the metal tin in her tote bag. She made another phone call. I watched her lips move silently. Then at one point she said something clearly enough for the camera to pick up. I can meet later. 2 more bottles. Yes, they are sealed. But I need full payment today. Not tomorrow. Today. It was blunt, businesslike, and it had nothing to do with a sick child. Around noon, she changed clothes and left with Jacob. She locked the door behind her and walked away looking like any mother taking her child to the park. Anyone watching from outside would never guess that she had conducted a drug exchange in my living room less than an hour earlier. I stopped the footage. The room was completely still. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear my heartbeat in the quiet. I pressed play again, needing to be absolutely certain. I fast-forwarded until near noon again. The camera caught one more exchange. Another knock, another package, another envelope, another deposit into the metal tin. It was not random. It was not a lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a system, a business. The camera continued recording until she and Jacob left. Then the footage was blank until I walked in later that afternoon. I sat there for a long time staring at the screen. My hands were tense on my knees, my throat felt tight. This was not something I could explain away or rationalize or treat as a family conflict. It was evidence, clear evidence of illegal distribution, of fraud, of endangerment, and not just one incident, multiple. I thought of Mom and how she always defended Brenda, how she always said that Brenda had been dealt tough breaks, that she just needed compassion, that life had not been fair to her. But compassion had nothing to do with this. Tough breaks did not explain this. And life's unfairness did not justify using a 7-year-old boy to access medication she could sell for cash. I closed the laptop slowly. I went into the living room and looked at Jacob sleeping. He was lying sideways across the couch, his small foot dangling over the edge. His breathing is steady and soft. His face is peaceful. He looked safe. But he was not safe, not with her choices shaping his life. I reached out and pulled the blanket up over him. My hand trembled, not from fear but from a dawning certainty. I could not confront her alone. I could not reason with her. I could not bargain with her. This was far beyond anything two sisters could work out between themselves. This was criminal, and more importantly, this was dangerous. I walked back to my room, still feeling the heaviness in the air. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I realized that the moment I hit pause on that footage, everything about my responsibility had shifted. I was no longer just a sister trying to keep peace. I was not just an aunt trying to help. I was a medical professional with a legal and ethical obligation to act. And I was the only adult in that apartment who was thinking clearly about what was best for that little boy. There was no going back to pretending. No going back to hoping it was a misunderstanding. No going back to looking the other way. I had the one thing she tried to hide: proof. And once you have proof, pretending becomes a form of complicity. I knew then with absolute clarity that I could not keep this inside the family. It was bigger than all of us. Bigger than any apology. Bigger than any explanation she might try to give. I had crossed a line that night, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. And whatever came next, it would not be quiet. When I woke up the next morning, the decision had not gotten easier. There was no relief waiting for me, only a heavy sense of responsibility that clung to me like damp air. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. And for a moment I wondered if Brenda already sensed that something had changed in me. I walked into the living room. She was still asleep. My nephew was curled into the corner of the couch, breathing softly. They both looked peaceful, untouched by the truth that had settled over the night like a shadow. I stood there for a long moment, feeling torn in a way I had never felt before. This was my sister. We grew up sharing rooms, sharing hand-me-down puzzles, sharing secrets whispered under blankets during thunderstorms. She had held my hand the day I left for college. She had cried when I bought my first car, saying she was proud of me. There was a time when we trusted each other without hesitation. A time when I believed that no matter what life threw at us, we would always be on the same side. But there was also a child sleeping on my couch. A child who trusted the adults around him to keep him safe. A child whose medical records were being twisted into something dangerous. A child who had been dragged into a world he did not understand. The conflict pulled me in two directions so hard I could almost feel myself splitting. I walked to the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee. My hands shook slightly as I held the mug. The steam rose in a thin line. I stared at it, hoping for clarity that did not come. I kept hearing my own voice from the night before. Proof. You have proof. You cannot ignore proof. I set the mug down and reached for my phone. I needed to talk to someone who understood both sides of me. Someone who could tell me whether I was losing my mind or doing the right thing. I called Dad. He picked up on the third ring. His voice sounded surprised. I rarely called before work. I took a breath and told him everything. Not the small details, not the messy pieces, but the truth in its simplest form. I told him that I believed Brenda was using her son to access medication she was selling. I told him I had camera footage showing money exchanged. I told him it had happened in my own apartment. I told him I did not know what to do. Then I waited. Dad said nothing for a long time. The silence stretched so wide that I wondered if the call had dropped. I checked my screen. It had not. He was still there, just silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. He said that he always worried something like this might happen. He said Brenda had been sliding in the wrong direction for years. He said he hoped she would turn herself around. He said he prayed for her. Then he told me something I did not expect. He said that if I stayed silent, I would be carrying part of the weight of whatever she did next. He said that protecting her had become the one thing keeping her from facing reality. And he said that sometimes loving someone means letting consequences find them. He paused again. Then he asked how bad it really was. I told him. All of it. Another long silence followed. Then he said that if I needed to make a call, I should make it, and that he would stand with me no matter what followed. He did not sound angry. He did not sound emotional. He sounded tired, and maybe a little relieved that someone else finally saw what he had seen for years. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table without moving. The sun had risen enough to turn the window edges gold. The heat from my coffee had faded. I wrapped both hands around the mug, even though it was no longer warm. I needed to feel something steady. I thought of Mom and how she would react. She would say I misunderstood. She would say Brenda was stressed. She would say families do not turn on each other. She would ask why I did not try harder to help. She would call me cold. She would say that children need their mothers no matter what those mothers have done. And maybe she would believe every word she said. But Dad knew the truth, and deep down so did I. I stood up and walked into my bedroom where the laptop still sat on the dresser. I opened it slowly. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment before I clicked the play button again. I watched the footage from the camera a second time, then a third. The knock, the exchange, the envelope of money, the counting. The second caller promised cash. The notes she made afterward. By the fourth viewing, the footage no longer shocked me. It merely confirmed what I already knew. I could not unsee it. I could not pretend it meant anything other than what it clearly meant. This was a pattern, a system, something she had been doing long enough to become efficient. I closed the laptop once more and walked into the hallway. I peeked into their room. Brenda was still asleep, her back turned, her breathing even and deep. She looked peaceful, almost childlike. The calm of someone who had not felt consequences in a long time. I closed the door quietly and returned to the living room. My nephew stirred on the couch. His feet twitched under the blanket, as if he were running in a dream. I sat beside him. For a moment I just watched him sleep. His small hand was resting on the armrest. I touched it lightly. It was warm and soft. It grounded me. He deserved safety. He deserved the truth. He deserved a childhood free from whatever chaos she had dragged into his life. I whispered in my own mind. Protect him first. Deal with her later. I stood again and walked back to my room. I picked up my phone. My hand trembled only slightly this time. I went to the website for my insurance provider. I searched for the section on reporting suspected fraud. It was not hard to find. There was a hotline. A number that promised confidentiality and immediate review. I saved the number in my contacts, but I did not call yet. I needed to breathe first. I paced the room slowly. I opened the blinds, then closed them again. I sat on the bed, then stood back up. I walked to the kitchen, then returned to the bedroom. Every movement felt like I was walking deeper into a choice I could not undo. I sat on the edge of the bed and put the phone on my lap. The smallest action sometimes requires the greatest courage. I reminded myself that I was not punishing her. I was protecting a child. I was preventing something worse. I was stepping in where no one else could or would. Finally, I took a long breath and pressed the call button. A calm voice answered. She asked if I wanted to report suspicious activity related to medical coverage. I said yes. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Thin but steady. The woman asked for details. I did not accuse. I did not point fingers. I simply explained that I believed a child was having prescriptions filled, under questionable circumstances. I said I had seen multiple medications that did not match his condition. I said I had concerns that should be reviewed by professionals who could verify the legitimacy of those claims. Every word felt like placing a heavy stone on a scale that had long been tipping in the wrong direction. The woman thanked me. She said a file would be opened. She said someone from the investigative team might contact me for additional information. She said the most important thing was that the report had been filed so procedures could begin. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. The apartment was completely silent, the kind of silence that fills every corner of a room. I stared straight ahead, not thinking, not breathing deeply, just absorbing the truth. I had stepped across a line I could never step back from. Up until that moment, everything had been internal. Suspicion, doubt, worry, fear. Now the situation has entered the world outside these walls. Other people would know. Other people would investigate. Other people would see what I saw. The weight of that was real, heavy, final. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street below. Cars were lined neatly at the curb. A man walked his dog slowly. 2 teenagers rode bicycles toward the park. Life moved normally, peacefully, as if the world had no idea that everything inside my apartment had shifted in a way that could not be undone. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass. The morning air felt cold even through the window, and in that moment I understood something with full clarity. I had not betrayed my family. I had protected the child who had no voice in any of this. And whatever storm came next, it was already on its way. I stepped back from the window and turned toward the hallway. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls closer. The decision was made. The call was logged. The system would begin moving. I could not predict what would follow. I could not control the fallout. I could only face what came next. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. But I did not yet understand how quickly everything would move once the system took over. I thought I would have days, maybe even weeks, before anyone acted on the report I made. I thought there would be time to brace myself, to prepare the people in my life, to steady my own heart for what was coming. I was wrong. The system moved faster than the family ever could. Just 2 days after I made the call to the insurance fraud hotline, there was a soft knock at my apartment door early in the morning. It was not even fully light outside. I was still in pajamas, hair tied back, eyes barely awake. I opened the door expecting a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, 2 people stood there. A woman in a navy sweater with a badge clipped to her belt, and a man holding a folder. They introduced themselves as representatives from Child Protective Services. My stomach tightened as if something inside me had dropped straight through the floor. They were calm, polite, and almost gentle in the way they explained why they were there. They said they had received a report about possible misuse of medical treatment for a minor. They said they were required to follow up within a specific time frame. They said they were not here to accuse anyone. They only needed to verify the well-being of the child living in the home. My throat felt dry as I stepped aside to let them in. My nephew was sitting on the living room carpet, still wearing his dinosaur pajamas, building a tower of blocks. He looked up with a bright smile and said good morning, as if the world were exactly as it should be. Both agents greeted him softly, crouched down to his level, asked him how old he was, what he liked to play, and whether he felt okay. He nodded happily. He even giggled at one point. The woman asked if I could speak privately with her while the man stayed with us, the child. I led her to the small dining table. She asked measured, steady questions. Had I noticed anything unusual about my nephew's health? Had I seen him taking medication? Who administered it? Did any doctor prescribe treatments that seemed unnecessary? How often did the child express discomfort? Did I observe any breathing issues or rashes or fevers? Her tone never changed. It was not a suspicion. It was information gathering. I answered honestly, giving only facts. I said I had never once seen him struggle to breathe. I had never heard wheezing. I had never seen him cough for more than a moment. He had run, jumped, played, and eaten full meals. I told her that the medications seemed excessive for his symptoms. I told her that labels showed different doctors from different cities. I told her I was concerned that none of the treatments matched what I observed. She took notes, nodding slowly, occasionally pausing before writing, as if weighing the information carefully. She asked where the medications were kept. I pointed toward the cabinet in the hallway. The second agent opened it, taking photos of the bottles. He counted quietly, confirming each type. He asked if I had access to any medical records. I said yes, that my sister kept the documents in a folder under her suitcase. He asked permission to photograph them. I agreed. They never looked angry. They never looked shocked. They had seen this before. Maybe not my exact situation, but enough similar ones that they moved with an unsettling efficiency. After finishing their questions, they thanked me for my cooperation and said they might need to return for additional information. They left as calmly as they had arrived, stepping into the cool morning air while my nephew waved goodbye at the door. I closed it slowly, leaning against the wood for a moment longer than I should have. My heart was beating too fast, uneven, like it could not decide whether to race forward or collapse. I felt both relieved and terrified. The process had officially started. There was no covering this up anymore. Now that CPS had stepped in, law enforcement would not be far behind. And I was right. 2 more days passed, filled with the strange quiet that comes before a storm. I went to work trying to keep some sense of normalcy, but I carried a heaviness that made every step feel slower than usual. At home, Brenda seemed unaware of anything unusual. She kept to her routine. She sent texts, made calls, checked the bag of medication as if it were part of an ordinary day. She spoke sweetly to her son when he was looking and snapped at him when he was not. Every time I looked at her, the knot in my chest pulled tighter. On the 3rd afternoon, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. I would not have thought much of it, Except I saw the same sedan the next morning. Then again that evening. Sometimes there was a man inside. Sometimes there was a woman. They never approached the building. They never got out. They just watched. I suspected they were police. By the 5th day, something inside me felt stretched thin. I could sense the tension building around us, invisible but growing heavier, like air thickening before a tornado touches down. That evening, everything broke open. It began at dusk. My nephew was in the living room coloring with markers. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner while Brenda paced the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp and irritated. She kept saying she needed more time, that she could not get the next refill until the following week. She promised she would have the other medication by tomorrow. She repeated herself again and again. Then came the pounding at the door. Not a knock, a command. I froze. Brenda froze. My nephew looked up with wide eyes. The pounding came again. Police. Open the door. Brenda's face drained of color faster than I had ever seen a person turn pale. Her hand trembled as she clutched her phone. She looked at me, eyes panicked and pleading. I did not move. I felt everything inside me harden into something unshakable. Police. This is a search warrant. Open the door now. Brenda rushed toward the door, stopping halfway as if her legs no longer obeyed her. She whispered my name, begging me silently to do something. I did nothing. I walked to my nephew, lifted him gently into my arms, and stood firmly near the living room wall. The door opened under the force of a final command. Officers stepped inside. Their vests identified them. Their presence filled the room, instantly purposeful and direct. Brenda stumbled backward as an officer held the warrant up where she could see. They did not yell. They did not threaten. They spoke clearly and firmly. They told her they had reason to believe controlled substances were stored in the apartment without proper authorization. They told her they would be searching the premises. They told her to remain where she was. My nephew buried his face against my shoulder. I rubbed his back gently, whispering that everything was okay, that he was safe. Officers moved through the apartment with a precision I recognized from my time working closely with emergency teams. One checked the hallway cabinet and called out what he found. Another uncovered the bag under the bed. Another photographed the labels. Another opened the folder under Brenda's suitcase and let out a quiet breath of disbelief at the quantity of prescriptions inside. Medication bottles were collected into evidence bags. Cash was counted. Notes were taken. The quiet efficiency of it was almost more terrifying than if they had yelled. It made everything feel inevitable. Brenda sank to the floor, shaking. She kept repeating that she could explain, that it was a misunderstanding, that the medications were necessary, that her son was sick, that she had done nothing wrong. The officers did not argue with her. They simply followed procedure. One of them stepped toward her with cuffs in hand. He informed her she was being detained while the investigation continued. She looked up at me with a face full of disbelief, as if she had expected me to step between her and the consequences, as if she truly believed I would protect her from the truth she created. I did not move. She called my name. She said she was my sister. She said the family did not do this to each other. She said I had ruined her life. She said I had no idea what she had been through. She said she did not deserve this. I held my nephew closer. His small arms tightened around my neck. His breathing was fast, frightened. I whispered that he was safe. I did not look away from him even as they lifted her to her feet and began, guiding her toward the door. She was still talking, still pleading, still trying to control the story. But the officers did not respond. They were not there for excuses. They were there for facts. As they walked her past us, she broke into sobs. For a moment, she tried to reach toward her son, but an officer gently redirected her. She turned her face toward me once more, eyes bright with tears and fury. She asked how I could stand there and let this happen. I did not answer. There are moments in life where silence is the only truth left. The door closed behind them. The apartment fell into a heavy quiet, broken only by the soft sounds of my nephew crying into my shoulder. Officers remained inside a while longer to finish documentation. One of them approached me and spoke in a calm voice. He said CPS would be notified immediately. He said they would place the child in temporary care until a guardian could be verified. He said someone would call me within the hour. I nodded. My arms tightened protectively around the child who had been dragged into all. of this without understanding any part of it. When the officers left, the apartment was left in an eerie stillness, bags of evidence gone. The cabinet is empty. The hallway is quiet. The home felt stripped of more than medication. It felt stripped of illusion. Family can hide many things, but systems once moving do not stop for anyone. And now the system has reached us, and there was no family shield strong enough to stop it. The apartment felt hollow after the police left, as if every wall had absorbed what happened and was still vibrating with the echo. My nephew had fallen asleep against my shoulder from sheer exhaustion. I carried him to the bedroom and tucked him under a blanket. His little hand clung weakly to my shirt for a moment before letting go. I watched him breathe steady and safe. And for one brief second I allowed myself to feel relief, but the rest of the night felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The process that followed moved in steps, not as dramatic as the knock at the door, but just as irreversible. CPS returned within the hour. They walked me through temporary custody procedures. They asked about the child's father, where he lived, how involved he had been before all this. They asked if I could care for my nephew temporarily until placement was decided. I said yes before they finished the sentence. But temporary meant exactly that. Nothing more. The next morning, his father arrived. His name was Mark Carter, and I had not seen him in almost 4 years. He stepped inside the apartment with wide eyes, looking more lost than angry. He walked straight to his son and held him so tightly I could see the child's small body lift off the ground. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He only asked what happened, and when I told him the truth, he sank into the nearest chair, hands covering his face. Within 7 days, the legal machine was already moving toward court. Not fast enough for the news to stop spreading within the family circle, but fast enough that my mom and dad barely had time to process any of it before they were dragged along. The court hearings were scheduled in a downtown building, tall and quiet and too cold for January. The first time I walked into that courtroom, my hands trembled even though I tried to hide it. It was not fear of speaking. It was fear of witnessing the moment where my sister's life split into a before and after. She was brought into the room from a side door. No handcuffs, just a deputy at her shoulder. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes dull, her face stripped of makeup. She did not glance at me. She looked straight ahead as if she could pretend none of us were here. The first big moment happened during the reading of the charges. The judge, a woman in her 50s with glasses perched on the end of her nose, began reading calmly from the paperwork. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of documents. Possession of controlled substances without lawful prescriptions. Fraudulent acquisition of medication. Insurance fraud exceeding $10,000. Endangerment of a minor. Intent to distribute controlled medication. Each charge landed like a stone dropping into still water. No theatrics. No disbelief. Just a fact. I heard my mom sob quietly behind me. Dad reached for her hand but did not take his eyes off the judge. He looked carved from stone, like he had prepared himself for this moment long before it arrived. Brenda's shoulders twitched slightly when the endangerment charge was read. A single tear slipped down her face, but she did not lift her head. She stood still as if frozen in a moment she could not rewind. After the charges, witnesses were called. Officers first, then the CPS representative, then the insurance investigator. They each testified succinctly, professionally, without cruelty. They presented the number of prescriptions, the video footage, the inconsistencies in her statements, the evidence found in my apartment. Then it was my turn. I walked up to the stand feeling strangely detached from my own feet. The courtroom lights felt too bright, and the microphone seemed too close to my mouth. The attorney asked my name and position. When she asked me to describe my involvement, I kept my voice steady. I told them I loved my nephew. I told them I worked in pediatric care and had experience identifying symptoms in children. I told them I had seen no signs of the conditions my sister claimed he had. I said I never once saw him struggle to breathe or display any allergic reactions or attention issues that matched the medications prescribed. I did not mention betrayal. I did not mention fear. I did not mention the nights lying awake wondering when everything would explode. I did not mention that she had copied my keys and broken into my sense of safety. I told them facts, only facts. Facts were heavy enough by themselves. When the attorney asked if I believed my sister's actions put her son at risk, I hesitated only for a breath, then answered yes. A quiet yes, but clear. I did not look at Brenda while I spoke. But as I stepped off the stand, I felt her eyes follow me, sharp as glass and filled with an emotion I could not decipher. The second major moment came 2 weeks later with the custody hearing. This time the courtroom was smaller. Fewer seats. Softer lighting. More tension. Mark sat next to his attorney looking resolved but weary. Across from him, Brenda sat alone with her public defender. Mom was behind her clutching a tissue, shaking her head every few minutes, as if she still could not believe this was real. Dad sat beside her, jaw clenched. The judge entered and began reading the findings from CPS. My heart sped up with every word. The report was clear. The child showed no signs of the medical conditions for which prescriptions were obtained. The mother had utilized multiple clinics across several cities. The medications were stored in quantities far beyond personal use. The environment posed a risk to the child's well-being. The judge stated calmly that the child would be placed under temporary full custody of his father. Visitation for the mother would be suspended indefinitely pending completion of a psychological evaluation substance assessment and compliance with court-ordered programs. Brenda finally broke them. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth, her entire body shaking with silent sobs. Mom reached for her, but the bailiff motioned gently for her to remain seated. The judge asked if Brenda wanted to make a statement. She nodded weakly. She tried to speak. The words came out jagged and lost. She said she never meant to hurt her son. She said she was overwhelmed. She said she needed money. She said she loved him more than anything. She said she thought she could handle it. She said she never believed it would go this far. Her voice cracked. She begged the judge not to take him away. The judge listened without interrupting, but her expression did not change. When Brenda finished, the judge folded her hands together and delivered the decision in a voice that was clear and unemotional. Custody transferred immediately. Visitation suspended. Compliance required. Case to be reviewed after 12 months. It was not dramatic. It was not cruel. It was simply law, cold clarity laid out in words that left no space for hope or negotiation. Mark placed a hand on his attorney's shoulder as if to steady himself. He looked relieved and devastated at the same time. A man protecting his child but mourning the collapse of what should have been a normal family life. Mom began to cry more openly, covering her face with both hands. Dad did not cry. He closed his eyes and lowered his head, the weight of disappointment settling into his shoulders like a burden he had carried for years. Brenda stared at the table in front of her, eyes unfocused. She looked like a person whose world had been wiped clean in a single sweep. Not erased, just emptied. When the hearing adjourned, no one moved at first. The silence in the room was thick, almost physical. The kind of silence that feels like it could swallow every sound in the world. I stood slowly. My legs felt stiff, like they had forgotten how to move. No one looked at me. Not Mom, not Dad, not Brenda. It was not hostility. It was something heavier. Something like resignation. Outside the courtroom, people walked by carrying papers, chatting quietly, living ordinary lives untouched by what had just happened inside those walls. The world kept moving forward while our family stood still, cracked open and scattered. Mark approached me with his son in his arms. The boy reached out for me instinctively, and Mark led him. I hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of shampoo and the warmth of his small body. When I let go, Mark nodded at me with quiet gratitude. He said he would keep me updated. He said I could visit. He said he wanted his son to have stability, and that I had given him more safety in the past month than he had known in a long time. I watched them walk away down the hallway. His small hand wrapped around his father's shoulder head, resting peacefully. Behind me, I heard my mom whisper my name, her voice trembling. I did not turn around. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing to give in that moment. No comfort, no explanation, no words. Some silences are honest. Some silences are necessary. I walked toward the exit without looking back. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to sting my lungs. Cars rushed by. People crossed the street. A bus hissed as it pulled to a stop. Life continued. Inside me, pure stillness. Everything was over, and the silence that followed was heavier than any verdict the judge could have spoken. The months that followed did not feel like a clean ending. They felt more like a long unwinding, the kind of slow quiet that comes after a storm when the air is still, unsettled, and you are not sure yet if it is truly over. I kept working at the hospital, picking up shifts, traveling to cover staff shortages in nearby cities, doing everything that helped my mind stay grounded. Some days I felt steady. Other days the memory of that courtroom pressed into my chest like a weight and could not lift. My nephew settled into life with his dad. I visited him every other weekend at a small rental house in northern Phoenix, where Mark had set up a bright bedroom full of new books and sketch pads. The boy had grown taller and calmer, like the months of instability had finally started easing out of his little body. He still had questions, though. Children always do. The first time he asked me if he had ever really been sick, I was pouring him juice in the kitchen while he wrapped his arms around a stuffed dinosaur. His voice was so small I almost missed the words. I sat down beside him at the table and told him the truth as gently as I could. I told him his body had always been strong. I told him he had never needed all those medicines. I told him none of it was his fault. He listened without looking at me, and after a moment he climbed into my lap and stayed there quietly until the tension in his shoulders loosened. His therapist encouraged honesty but told me not to overload him, so I kept my answers simple and steady. When he asked if his mom had meant to hurt him, I said no. I believe she was a person who became lost in her own choices. I did not know how much he understood, but he nodded slowly and leaned his head against my chest as if the shape of the truth was enough for now. At home, I changed the locks on my apartment, not because I was afraid she would return, but because it felt like closing a chapter for myself. I stood in the hallway while the locksmith drilled out the old hardware, the metal bits scattering across the floor like tiny reminders of what used to be. When he handed me the new keys, cold and clean, I felt a quiet sense of reclaiming something I had not even realized I had lost. Mom visited me a few weeks after that. She knocked softly and waited with her hands clasped in front of her like she was not sure if she still had permission to be part of my space. I let her in. She looked smaller too, worn from months of sorting through guilt and disbelief. She sat at my kitchen table and apologized. Not excuses, no explanations, just an apology for all the times she had dismissed my concerns. For the years she had believed that softness meant weakness and that loyalty meant silence. She did not ask me to forgive Brenda. She did not ask me to take back the choices I made. She only asked if I could understand how deeply she regretted not seeing things sooner. I told her the truth. I understood. But some hurt does not disappear just because someone finally recognizes it. Some distance remains because it has been earned over time. Dad came by once too, slipping in quietly after work, still wearing his uniform from the city maintenance office. He sat down, folded his hands, and stared at them for a long time before speaking. He did not apologize. He did not need to. He simply said he was proud of me for protecting the boy and for standing firm, even when it tore the family apart. It was the closest thing to a blessing he had ever given me. When he left, he squeezed my shoulder in a way that made my eyes burn. As for Brenda, I heard bits and pieces through the attorneys and occasional notices in the mail. She was serving her time in county jail and later would be moved to a longer-term facility. She attempted to send me letters at first, pages and pages of explanations and pleas, stories about how everything had spiraled beyond her control. I did not read them. I handed them to her attorney unopened. I wondered sometimes if that made me cruel, but I knew deep down that opening those envelopes would not change what happened and would not undo the danger she created for her son. Some boundaries are built for survival. Work became my anchor again. I traveled for a temporary assignment in Nevada in early spring, helping a small hospital manage a surge in pediatric cases. The days were long but healing in their own way. Caring for children reminded me of why I had chosen this field in the first place. When I leaned over a bed to comfort a frightened toddler or explain results to anxious parents, I felt pieces of myself settling back into place. One afternoon in late April, during a short break between rounds, I sat outside the cafeteria and watched the sunlight stretch across the parking lot. My mind drifted to the past year. I thought about the night my sister copied my keys, the fear that had crept into my apartment disguised as family, The moment I realized those bottles of medicine were more than just clutter in my cabinet, I thought about the phone call to the insurance hotline, the sound of my nephew's crying during the police search, and the silence in the courtroom after the verdict. Losing my sister was not a clean break. It was a slow erosion, the kind that happens grain by grain until you look up one day and find a canyon where a road used to be. I miss her sometimes. I miss the version of her I had known years ago, before everything hardened and twisted. But grief and longing do not erase the truth. They simply coexist with it. What I kept was my integrity, and the safety of a little boy who did not deserve any of this. The last time I saw my nephew before summer break, he handed me a drawing. It was a picture of two people standing in front of a house with a big sun in the sky. He said it was me and him. He said the sun meant the bad days were over. I hugged him tightly and told him the sun was his, not mine. Later that night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I looked around the rooms that had once felt invaded and unsafe. They felt different now. Not untouched, not restored to what they were before, but mine again, shaped by everything I had faced and everything I had chosen. Some people say revenge is about making someone pay. For me, it was about drawing a line and refusing to let harm continue. It was about standing between a child and the world that was failing him. It was about holding on to the truth even when it cost me someone I once loved. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.